Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Boca Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz. Happy Monday to you. If you're with us live, it's good to have you here today. And yes, believe it or not, we actually started a few seconds early. I'm kind of proud of that. Occasionally we run into technical issues and we have to kind of overcome those. And we were on point today. So thanks to my guest in advance, and I'm going to introduce my brand new guest here in just a second. Before I do that, just a reminder, of course, for those of you that are live streaming, don't be, I was about to say don't be shy. It's a little bit ironic considering the topic today. We are going to be getting into the topic of introversion, but don't be shy. We're friendly, we're nice, we won't bite. Don't hesitate to ask questions and comment as we get into this conversation today with Cindy, and would love for you to be part of the conversation. And if you're not live streaming, don't hesitate to come join us. If you follow us at Boca Podcast, Bokeh Podcast, on Instagram, of course, you can keep up with the upcoming live streams that we're going to be pushing out. And we're going to go to at least 2 episodes a week. So make sure that you're signed up, you're keeping up. And then just last note before I introduce our guest for today, I do want to remind you all to look for opportunities to give back. I made my donation to Charity Water. You can see a little receipt. It's popped up on the screen there. I just encourage you to look for opportunities to give back. I mentioned this, I think, during our Friday episode, but Sean Lee was a guest that we had in the show some time ago, and he really pushed me to do more. And I think most of us, if we have a computer or a phone, we're in a position financially, even just to give a few dollars. And it's amazing how a little bit of money can go a long way. So let's look for those opportunities to give back. All right. Well, we already have people chiming in on the live stream. I'm excited to have everybody here. So let's introduce our brand new guest for today. Cindy Ames is here. Cindy, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and having this conversation about a really important topic.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks, Nathan, for having me.
Well, and we had a chance to catch up a little bit before we got started, which is kind of fun. I told Cindy this off air that I'm kind of nerding out, honestly. I'm really, really excited to actually get into this topic today of introversion. We're going to talk about how to overcome introversion as we interact with our clients in business, especially for photographers. And Cindy, you probably know this, but a lot of photographers in our industry were self-claimed introverts. So I think it's a super relevant topic.
Absolutely, it is.
Well, we're going to go there in just a second, but let's kind of get warmed up like we normally do here on the podcast. And Cindy, I want to talk to you about your business. And you were telling me before we get started, you've got your hands in different things, but what you're here representing today is your life coach or emotional coaching business and or emotional intelligence coaching. I saw that phrase on your website, actually, and I really like that because a lot of people will say that they're life coaches, and I think it's kind of general and vague at times. That specificity of emotional intelligence, I think, is something that more and more people are becoming sensitive to. And I love that. But I'd love for you to I guess, share what your business's brand position is then in that regard.
Sure, of course. I'm happy to do that. So mine is I help entrepreneurs unlock limiting beliefs so that they can have abundant businesses and lives. And I find that it's a really important component to look at both the business side and the life side because one can feed into the other. And it all comes down to mindset that we have. And sometimes we have certain thoughts that we believe are true. And if we really take a moment to examine them, those thoughts might be limiting us in some way. And so by looking at them, it allows us to say, you know what, this really isn't working for me, so let's make an adjustment here. Let's bring in another thought that helps me to get the outcomes I want, right? Because that's what we all want. We want better outcomes in our lives.
Okay. So many directions I already want to go.
I know, right?
I'm so excited about this. So first of all, you're talking about belief, and then ultimately the ability that we have to choose those beliefs, to frame how we see something in order to improve our lives. Certainly as individuals and business owners, you talked about that. I literally have on my wrist here, and for anybody who's live streaming, you can see this, but these are the Japanese characters. So on the inside of my right wrist is the Japanese word sentaku, that's choice. And then on the inside of my left wrist is the kanji characters for the Japanese word kakushin, which is belief. And I've realized, and still kind of, I guess, learning to apply this more consistently, but I realized a number of years ago the significance of those two concepts. We have the ability to choose our belief system. And a lot of times belief system is kind of tied to a religious idea, but literally everything that we do in life is driven by a belief or set of beliefs. And once we realize that and then realize we can choose those beliefs, it's incredibly empowering, right?
Oh, it is so empowering. In fact, what really changed for me was this idea, this statement that you can choose any thought you want. And if that's the case, why not choose a thought that's most helpful to you? And I use in my practice with my clients, I use a model. It's called Think, Feel, Act. And what we do is we look at a thought we have, and we have a thought about the circumstances around us. And their circumstances are anything outside of us, right? So they're factual, there's no drama attached to them. You could prove them in a court of law, so to speak. So if I were to say the temperature is 95 degrees, that's a fact. I can prove it by taking the temperature, right? Then I have a thought about the circumstance in my life, and that thought creates emotions inside of me. And those emotions drive my behaviors, which leads to my outcomes. So if I don't have an outcome I like, I need to go back to my thoughts and examine them and examine what are they telling me, how are they informing me, and what might I need to change so I can have different feelings or emotions so that I can have different results, different outcomes, right?
Yeah.
We get to do that. That's what's so exciting.
It is so exciting. Yeah. I'm literally getting goosebumps because what you're saying is a set of concepts that not only, again, have I been realizing more and more in my life, but I've also been trying to encourage others with. And so it makes me even more excited to have you here on the show and talk a little bit about this. I have to, though, go back to your brand position because this is honestly really impressive. So for anybody who's not live streaming with us, I've got this pulled up, Cindy Ames, AMES coaching.com, Cindy's website. And this is honestly one of the more impressive brand position statements that I've seen from our guests to date. It's above the fold, which means I don't have to scroll down to find it. It's in big text, so I'm not going to miss it. It's literally the first thing I see right next to Cindy's wonderful smiling face. I help entrepreneurs unlock limiting beliefs so they can have abundant businesses and lives. And, Cindy, aside from the presentation itself, which I think is so well done, I love the practical nature of that statement. I think a lot of times photographers, when they're trying to create something that might resemble a position statement, this is the value proposition that I offer through my business. They tend to, especially in the photography industry, get kind of pretty and cute, and the actual practical nature or value proposition is missed as a result. I just love how practical that statement is because there's no confusion about what it is that you offer. Yeah,
you have to be very clear and direct and let the person know what it is you can do for them, right? And it has to be succinct so that, one, you grab their attention, and two, they know exactly what it is you can do for them. And then right below that fold is where I talk about what I just shared with you and your listeners, the think, feel, act. So I talk about that too. So I reinforce how I can do that fairly quickly in my mind.
Yeah. And change your thoughts to change your life as I'm scrolling further down your page. And, this is actually a really great example too of how photographers listening in, for those of you who are listening in, you hear me talk a lot about brand position and the importance of putting that brand position statement above the fold, clearly established so that nobody has to go searching for it. There's no confusion about what it is your business offers, but there's no reason that you can't then build on that concept. And Cindy does that as you scroll further down the page. Again, though, I just love the larger text, which drives most of that. A lot of photographers will put paragraphs of text in small font. And I think these days it's just so easy to get lost in that. And so I just love the way that you've done this, Cindy, and it's a good example for our listeners. I know that we've got a good number of people streaming with us already, and they're waiting for the conversation about introversion. So I'm going to keep going to the next question, next introductory question here about customer service. And again, I know that you do a variety of things, including life coaching. And I'd love for you to share what you've learned about one of the most important principles behind providing a good customer experience to your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So my other side of what I do is instructional design and facilitation. And I've been in the sales world for probably, 16, 17 years or so. And in that time of instructional design, I focused a lot on sales training. And one of the things I strongly believe in is that in order to connect with a customer, you build the relationship so you can create trust with them. And in order to build that relationship, you do discovery. And discovery is just a simple word for asking questions. Your job as a entrepreneur, as a person to connect with that customer, is to ask them questions. So it's not invasive. And what you want to know is you want to learn what their needs are. And you want to learn what their needs are so that you can provide a solution for them. That's what you're there for, is to provide that solution, right? So you can only do that by asking questions to get specific answers to what their needs are, specific understanding to those needs, and that way you can provide those specific solutions for them.
And would you say that then through those the types of questions that you're asking, that you're able to encourage that trust that you were talking about as well, or how does that trust come about?
Yeah, absolutely. The trust comes from the conversation, right? So when you go out on, say you're starting to date, right? You have conversations along the way. You have lots and lots of conversations before you get to the point where you're walking down the aisle, so to speak, right? That has to happen. And it's the same thing with our customers and our businesses. We have to ask those questions. And it's not always about selling right away. I want to know about that person and what their needs are and what's important to them. And I want to understand that before I start bringing my solutions in to the story. If I know what's important to them, then I bring what's specific. So if I have all of these resources at my in my arsenal, in my toolbox, I have all of these resources, but they only need this, why should I talk about all of this?
Right.
It's a waste of time for them, and they lose interest. So if I ask them specifically what's important to them, how can I help, what are your needs, what are you looking for, just different questions, what's important to you, then I get that information, and then I pull from my toolbox and I say, oh, okay, I can help with this.
Yeah.
Does this make sense to you? Am I hearing you right? When I do that type of thing, then I'm connecting with them. I'm building that relationship, right?
Lead with curiosity.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's my biggest thing. Curiosity and empathy. Those two things together make a world of difference in building a relationship with somebody.
It's so true. Yeah, it's bit me too many times that I have not done both of those things, actually. Both been curious, I assume, but my ego tends to kind of push me to assume. I'm like, oh, I got this figured out. I know this person.
Right.
And it's very human to go into that pattern recognition mode. And actually, a lot of times I've been right. But to lead with that inhibits the ability to connect with somebody at a little bit deeper level and to develop that trust that you were talking about.
Right.
So starting with curiosity, having empathy for them, learning to put yourself in their shoes, it's so important. And I know we could have probably multiple episodes just on that topic, but I really appreciate your perspective. I want to keep going too and get to the next question, which is about time management. We talked briefly about family before we get started as well. So I know you've got family and you're doing a variety of things professionally. What's a big principle or idea that has driven your ability to kind of balance everything so that you stay healthy, your relationship with your family stays healthy, while you're able to also work as well?
Yeah, so my thought is I have enough time to do everything I need to do today. And if it doesn't get done today, it wasn't meant to be done today. So that thought allows me the peace to be able to walk away from my desk at the end of the day. So in this room that you see, this is my office in my home. I spend a lot of time in here.
Yeah.
And so that thought allows me to be, okay, it's time now to go to pottery, because that's one of my new hobbies.
Okay.
And I love being in that space. And if I don't walk away from work, then I don't get to do that. I don't get to enjoy that practice in those people. If I don't walk away, I don't get to spend time with my grandkids. I love the position I'm in, because as I manage my own time, if I need to go pick up my grandkids from school, I can do that because I can block out my time. Of course, I use all of the different scheduling and time management principles. I have all of that,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But the thought that manages my outcomes is the thought, I have enough time to do everything I need to do today. And if I don't, it's not meant to be done today. It was meant to be done tomorrow. And I'm okay with that.
The type A in me is kind of cringing a little because
Right?
and actually I'm curious how you would respond to this. So the flip side of the conversation is, and I know for photographers and certainly for myself as well, it's easy to get into a space where maybe on a certain day we're a little bit more tired than normal. And so we're just kind of getting through the day. And if I go to a day like that with, you know what, if I didn't get it done, it wasn't meant to be, that almost sounds lazy in my mind. So what's the balance there between kind of that type A and not going too far overboard with just being like, shrugging our shoulders?
Yeah, and I'm type A, so I totally get that.
Okay.
And it is kind of a mind-bending thing. But what we're talking about now is self-care, right? We're talking about being present in each of these areas in our lives fully.
Okay.
And I know for myself, I've proven it to myself over and over again, when I don't have that philosophy, my body shuts down. I hurt myself. I either have a lot of illnesses or physically I have horrible tension in my neck and my shoulders from all the keyboarding, my wrists, the whole bit. Yeah. My body physically stops working.
I get it.
So I know that if I manage that, and because I'm type A, I'm not going to ever be, on that, yeah, bro, whatever. If I don't get it, whatever. I show up for my business. I show up for myself. I show up for my family, right?
Yeah. So
I know it's going to get done. And I know it's not the end of the world.
That's it.
If A doesn't get done today.
True. Yep.
What is the difference if A gets done tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
I'm
guilty of that for sure. Like building something up in my mind way too big, way more than it needs to be. And you're right. Most cases, probably 98% of the time, that thing's really not as important as we just made it in our mind.
Yeah.
It's okay to push it to the next day in some cases. So I hear you. Good reminder for me for sure. All right. One last question before we get into this introversion topic. And this is, I'm actually really curious about this one from you. Self-help or business book that you would recommend to our listeners? Feel free to throw out a couple even if you'd like. If you're feeling really generous.
Yes, I do. I have two, and I have one right here. So it's Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. It is one of my favorite of the leadership books that I've read recently. Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind. Unkind. So it's when we set expectations, to be clear with the people around us on what our expectations are. So as a business owner, I find that to be really important, that when I'm talking with my clients, to be very clear on what they can expect from me and what I expect from them. When I take on a new client, part of my coaching agreement says that they're open to change, that this is a space, this is a time when they're ready for change. And if they're not, then that might not be a good time for coaching, because that's what coaching is about. It's about change. And so when you guys talk with your clients, you want to be clear on to what you can do for them. Never overpromise and underdeliver. We never want to do that, right? So I love that. And then the other book that I listen to, so I don't have a book to hold up for you, is Kristen Neff's book, Fierce Self-Compassion.
Okay.
One of the things that I think that a lot of us have is this judger voice inside of us. And sometimes that judger voice is just a little too loud, and we need to be able to manage it. It's a part of us. And so what I am doing is I am working on loving it, because it's a part of me, and telling it that I'm okay. Thanks for letting me know what's going on, and I've got this. And a phrase that I like to tell myself when I feel like I've made a big mistake or something's going on is
Sure.
that I'm human and humans make mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'm okay.
Mm.
Right? Because sometimes the best thing we can do is just to be kind to ourselves. Because when we're kind to ourselves, we open up so many more possibilities than when we're shut down and we're looking at it with a judging lens or a negative lens. When we do that, the possibilities, the choices out there are just so much more limited.
We treat others better too when we're comfortable with ourselves, and as a result, happy and kind with and to ourselves.
Yes.
It makes all the difference in the world in how we treat others. And I think that's been another good reminder for me as of late as well. Something that I needed to, because I'm super hard on myself for sure, and it's benefited me in so many different ways. I'm a different human being than I was a year ago, and in a better way because of that. But at the same time, because I push myself so hard, I also tend to kind of take out some of the frustration sometimes on others, and that's where I realize, okay, to your point, take a step back a second, and I need to soften the voice to myself, and that will then, of course, translate in the way that I treat others. That's a really important reminder. And I'm going to pop up on screen for anybody who isn't familiar with this book, Fierce Self-Compassion: How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. That's by Dr. Krista Neff. We'll link to that in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. And then the other book that you mentioned as well by Brene Brown, and that Clarity is Kindness. I thought it reminded me of a quote, actually, Cindy, that somebody that we had in the show, I don't know how long ago it's been, but Nina Larson, she said, people only get upset if they can feel confused or lied to. And that quote really stuck with me. And it's applicable certainly in our personal lives, but also as business owners, when you talk about expectation management, which is such a big challenge for like my editing company, for example, because there are a lot of moving parts to that service. Clarity is just, it goes without saying almost, but it's vital, right? And when there isn't clarity, it leads to frustration. And so we're on an ongoing basis, always trying to refine how we communicate, how we manage expectations, because that's so important. So that's also a really great reminder. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I wanted to get on to the main topic at hand. And I know some that are holding on for this. This is, we're going to talk, for everybody who hasn't seen the title of today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how to overcome introversion in our lives as photography business owners, and maybe just as entrepreneurs in general. And to be clear, when I say overcome introversion, I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, but I know that Cindy, based on conversations that I've had with so many photographers here on the podcast or otherwise, many photographers identify as being introverted and talk about how that kind of interferes with not just their social life, but their ability even to interact with clients comfortably. And so I'd love that you're going to kind of help us tackle this topic today and get into ways that we can kind of proactively kind of work around, if you will, those tendencies. But I mentioned to you before we got started, I love on this podcast getting into principles. I think principles, root level principles, are super important to understand. And when we talk about this idea of introversion, maybe even just to begin with, would you mind defining the word for our listeners, just so we have kind of a good baseline?
Sure, absolutely. So introversion is a person, or an introvert is a person who enjoys time alone, and they find that they're emotionally drained after being with people for a long time. And that's just a really simple definition of what an introvert is.
Okay. And would you say that kind of introversion, or the behavioral patterns that we call introversion, is that learned? Is it innate? Is it kind of a combination of both? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's innate. So you're hardwired that way. And when you're very young, your environment can help solidify that a little bit more. So some people are just extroverts and some people are just introverts. And neither is one better than the other, right? They just are. Yeah, you have a person has blue eyes, a person has brown eyes. Mm-hmm. Neither one is better or worse than the other. They just are, right?
Sure. I think the potential drawback is when it gets in the way of us living the life that we want to, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to just go to. Is it impacts us when it becomes a limiting belief, like what I say on my website. So when we allow the thought, I'm an introvert, and what does that mean to you, right? So does that mean something negative? Is that something holding you back? If that's the case, then what we want to do is look at those thoughts that you have around being an introvert. And by looking at those thoughts, we can look at what your outcomes are, and we can look at changing those thoughts. Remember, our thoughts, if we think our thought long enough, they become a truth for us. They become a belief for us.
Yep.
And in our neural pathways, they just get, I tell my clients, this is Cindy psychology.
Okay.
So we have neural pathways, right? And we believe something long enough, it becomes hardwired in our brain, and they're like ruts. And so that thought, shoo, is just really easy to get in, because we're like, oh yes, this is a truth. This is what I believe. So what we want to do is we want to get up and out of that rut into another belief that is more helpful for us.
Yeah.
You can believe you're an introvert, and it can be helpful. Think about the clients who love having and working with an introvert. I mean, that can be really terrific. Some people really want somebody who's a little bit more quiet, who brings a calming vibe to an already chaotic or high stress activity, like
Sure.
a wedding.
Yep.
Dude, do I want somebody who's like, wah, all crazy, trying to capture my attention? That could be a yay for somebody, and other people might want, wow, I want somebody with a Zen vibe, because I'm like wigging out of my mind right now, and I just want the Zen vibe to be able to just flow and get into this groove of this wedding, or I did. So my daughter is a photographer. I mentioned her earlier, Madison Thompson Photography, right? She did my brand photos, my brand shoot.
Brilliant. Shout out, Madison.
Yes, I was so nervous. I'm not used to being the subject of photos. And I'm usually, with a friend or a family member, my grandkids, and it's me, and I'm doing the posing, all of that jazz for the brand photo.
Of course.
And Madison's just really calm. She's, as I told you earlier, she's an introvert. She's just really calm, and she says, hey, this works. You got it. That looks good. She's giving me the good, words and everything. And I didn't need to be hyped up because I had enough nervousness. I just wanted to be comfortable in what I felt was an awkward look at me type setting. I'm not used to that.
Yeah, it's funny. And actually, I'm glad you bring it up. A lot of photographers do kind of lead that conversation about introversion as though it's a negative thing. And you're right. A lot of times, in fact, I think, unfortunately, in many cases, photographers have gotten so obsessed with themselves as the photographer at these various events that they become way too much the kind of center of attention, and more so than needs to. I mean, this is about that client who we're photographing.
Right.
So the idea that we can actually bring a more calming effect, to your point, Cindy, to that environment, I think is a really positive thing. But why do you think, though, that because it's interesting, I think early in the conversation, it seems to pop up when I'm talking to a photographer, I'm an introvert. Is there a reason that one would lead with that? Is that kind of a protective mechanism, or what is that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So they say that because that's the lens through which they view the world. And in their minds, that helps them describe themselves to somebody else. So if I say, Nathan, I'm an extrovert, then you have certain expectations or certain understanding of what I am or how I might show up. And that's the same thing for somebody who says I'm an introvert. So if somebody says to me they're an introvert, then I'm going to assume that they're likely to be a little bit more quiet and maybe not as boisterous. They might be more of an internal processor. I'm not sure. I'd wait to see if that happens or not. And then I would know that they would need some time alone, right? So it's just a matter of setting expectations. I think it's also it helps that person to share who they are. It's a descriptor, right?
Yeah,
it's a way to, and sometimes I think it can be also an excuse, right? Oh, I'm an introvert, so you know what, just let me be, or this is my excuse for how I'm showing up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you can be an introvert, and how would you want to show up, right? What would you want to be? I'm just thinking of, how is that holding you back? Is it holding you back? If it's not, no problem. But if it is holding you back in some way, let's talk about that.
But I think part of it, though, too, is, and you're right, there is in fact, I like the way that you frame that. It is a way for somebody to very quickly share a little bit about themselves. The flip side of that conversation, and this is the part that kind of drives me crazy about, it's I guess, our culture's obsession with personality types and enneagrams and even saying introverted, extroverted, is that we're very quick as individuals, as human beings, to buy into a label. Because if for no other reason than it does give us some sort of sense of safety, stability, because we're able to identify as this particular thing. And they're like, you almost like take an internal sigh of relief, right? Which is like, oh, okay, I'm an introvert. That's why I feel this way. But then it's used, as you were pointing out, kind of as a scapegoat a lot of times. They lead with the label on this thing. And where I feel like that's limiting is that we so buy into the label, the Enneagram number, the personality type, the introvert, the extrovert, that we ultimately then limit ourselves because there's this kind of almost subconscious assumption that that's who we are and I can't go beyond that. And that's where I think the limitation is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the limiting belief. So the question is, do you want that limiting belief? Is that working for you? Or is that not working for you? And if it's not working for you, then that's when you get to question your assumption. And what coaching does is it helps you question your assumptions. We think things, and they're so much a matter of fact for us, we don't question them. That's the thing. We don't question them. We don't hear ourselves. Like if I said to you, I need to get this project done. Okay, the word need, that's something I want to be aware of, because I want to reframe that. Think about the word.
But people would say that's OCD, Cindy. That, like, you're way overthinking that. You're overanalyzing it. I think the way that you do, but I'm also playing devil's advocate here because I know a lot of people don't realize the significance that a word holds. They just kind of rattle off a word or a phrase without really thinking about it. Don't realize that it actually carries weight for their subconscious.
Yes, it does, right? So if you look at the word need, that seems like it's so desperate, it's so limited. But if I say, I want to do this, look at that. I want to do that. It opens up possibilities.
You took ownership.
Right? So just by changing from need to want, we've shifted our perspective, which allows us to have greater outcomes. It allows us to have choice, abundance within that conversation. Another word is the word I should. I should do this. Well, what I say is, if you're using the word should, you're shoulding all over yourself.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't serve you to say, I should do this. It's a choice. When you open yourself up to choices, you can take better action. And so with the introversion, if you are limiting yourself, saying, I'm an introvert and that doesn't allow me to show up in a way that I want to show up, then we have to look at how it's limiting you and what you might want to achieve instead.
Now, you said something.
Because we can change that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. You're talking, though, about this idea of something serving you or not. So does this tendency of introversion, does it serve me or not? This may seem a little bit rhetorical, but just for clarity's sake, how do you establish what serves you? If something's going to serve me, if something is going to enable me, then I would assume that I already have set a goal or a set of goals for myself. So there's something that I'm trying to achieve. In order for somebody to determine whether or not these behavioral tendencies serve them or not, do they need to set some kind of personal goals or business goals first, or what's the process there?
I think it's just your thoughts, right? Your outcomes. So does the thought, I'm an introvert, serve me?
But I guess that's what I'm asking. Serve you in what sense? Like, is it making your life better, or helping you feel better, or?
Yes. Is it getting me what I want in life, right? Am I meeting my goals? Am I getting the outcomes? Am I having the relationships that I want? Am I having the life that I want? Am I obtaining the things that I want? And I think that goes for any thought that we have. Does it get us what we want in life? And that's what I mean. Does it serve me? You could also use the phrase, is it helpful? So is that thought that you have, is it helpful for you?
Yeah.
If it's not, I look at it this way. If it's not moving me forward, then it's not serving me or it's not helping me. And if that's the case, I need to look at it and I need to determine, if that's not working, I need to get another thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. I think it's important. What I've realized, and by the way, I was guilty of this too, and it's still something I have to be intentional about, but I think a lot of times in the photography industry, photographers, especially when it comes to running a business, don't have clear intentions. So they don't know where they're trying to go or what they're trying to achieve. So the idea then of determining whether or not something serves them or helps them is a little tough because there's no filter. It's just like I can kind of do any and everything. I want to be a photographer. And if that's great, they want to be a photographer, but that's not very specific. So now they don't know what they need to do in order to achieve something. They're just, I took pictures today. I'm a photographer. Okay, but that now you're only going to function at only so high a level because you're not trying to achieve anything specific. So it was kind of a leading question, I guess is probably a better phrase, in the sense that I think in order to determine whether or not something serves us, enables us, makes us better, it's also good to be clear about where we're trying to go in life as an individual, and then also as a business person too. We can determine whether or not, does this behavioral tendency serve me as a photographer or as an entrepreneur? And if it doesn't, we know that it doesn't because we know what we're trying to achieve. And now we're able to begin the corrective measures necessary to kind of make some adjustments and move beyond that. So I think this is actually a really great segue too to my next question. You mentioned to me before we got started that you've got 5 different ways that you were going to share that introverted photographers can kind of move beyond their tendencies, their introverted tendencies, interact with potential clients and clients a little bit more comfortably. And I'd love to get into those if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one would be looking at a person's mindset. And I love this question. What might change for you if? So the question is, what might change for you if, and then you fill in the blank, if being an introvert wasn't limiting? Whatever you want it to be. But looking at your mindset around being an introvert would be the very first thing, because you have to look at your mindset. Then the second one is when you go into that shoot, focus on the other person and what their needs are. Really center yourself on them, because when you can do that, you're distancing yourself from yourself. You're focusing on them. So your brain's energy is spent over here as opposed to in here worrying about how you're showing up and what you're supposed to say and all of that stuff, right?
Yep.
And so in my coaching practice, what we call that being present. So when I'm talking with a client, I'm focusing utterly on what their words are. And yes, I'm a human being, so my thoughts might drift. And when I see that, I'm like, and come right back. So as a photographer, you could do the same thing. Be present in the moment with that other person and focus on what their needs are.
I love that. It's so easy. Again, I get in my head way too much of the time, and it's so easy to get fixated there. And one of the simplest ways to adjust that or to kind of fix that is to focus on serving somebody else. Like we make so much of our life about us, and it's exhausting to us, ironically, when really a lot of times we could just kind of turn and face outward and look at that other person in front of us and figure out how we can make their lives a little bit better. And certainly this holds true in the case of a shoot even. It'd be easy to get stuck in our head. Instead, let's focus on creating an incredible environment for this individual or for these people that we're photographing and giving them a really great experience. And it's amazing how we redirect that focus. It's such a relief mentally and emotionally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is if you're having a long shoot, take time out. So like you're doing a wedding. I know weddings can last for hours and hours. Take time out for little me breaks. Okay. So, and when you do that, focus on your breathing. So, breathing is such it's such a thing we do all the time. We don't pay attention to it, but it's a really big thing. So if it's a long shoot, or if you get into overwhelm, you can do box breathing. And box breathing is really simple to do. And I do it with my clients before each session to ground ourselves. Okay. And box breathing, if you think about a box, you're going breathing in. And I just do a count of 4. You could do whatever. Count of 4. Breathing in for 4. Holding for 4. Exhaling for 4. Holding for 4. And then you do it in a few cycles, however many you have time for. But what happens is when you do the deep breathing, your parasympathetic nervous system calms down, and that anxious part in you that thinks you're unsafe, it smooths out. And so you don't go into that flee. That's the flee. I always want to turn them all around. You don't go into that. You're in that, again, that anxious part of your brain just calms down. So that's really, really helpful when you go into overwhelm.
That is such a powerful technique. It's surprising how something so simple is so effective, but I've used it a number of times. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. And maybe part of it is just the intentionality, the kind of innate presence that it requires in order to do it. But I also have realized for myself, I'm super athletic, so I naturally breathe hard. For example, when I go work out, when I get put in a really hard workout, I go play soccer, or maybe I'm riding the motorcycle. But otherwise, I tend to breathe kind of, I think, in a very shallow manner a lot of times.
Yeah, way up here.
And it's so problematic on multiple levels, mentally and for our overall health. So just taking the time every once in a while and doing that box breathing, or even at nighttime, if you're having a hard time going to sleep, that box breathing, it's incredible. So I highly recommend to everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Then the next one would be make sure you take time to schedule time to reboot after your shoot. So if you have a shoot, always make sure you build in however much time you need just to redo. And just to be quiet, and whatever that means to you. Is it just time in your car on the drive home? Is it going into your home and saying hi to your family, and then and tell them ahead of time, prep them, set expectations that you just need quiet time after a shoot, and you just come into your quiet space and just have some time. I call myself an extrovert with introvert tendencies, because I think there's more of a spectrum than a rigidity in this.
And so
when I have spent a full day in facilitating a training, I'm on stage the entire time. My brain is going, 5 million miles an hour, and I'm meeting the needs of this group, and I am exhausted by the end of the day, and I go back to my hotel room and I am quiet, and the only person I talk to is my husband, and I talk to him for just a short amount of time, and then I read a book. That's my recharging, right? And I just have that quiet time because I'm expended. And so whatever it is that you need to do, make sure you take care of yourself and schedule that quiet time.
That's really good. I know that you've got one, I think one more point here to share,
One
but
more, that's it.
I want to ask you a question here before you share that last
Yes.
one, and maybe tell a little bit of a story too, because let's see, I'm trying to think back, maybe 12 years ago, 15 years ago, I've been in the industry now for about 20 years, and
Yeah.
I was going to these photography parties at the various conferences, and there would be
Sure.
relatively large groups of people, and actually didn't even have to be that large, maybe even like 20, 30, 40 people, maybe some loud music playing in the background. And I would go into these parties and then within, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes felt tired or even exhausted. And that is, as you were describing, kind of the almost the de facto representation of an introverted tendency, right?
Yes.
But I don't remember exactly what the motivation was. Maybe I was reading a book or something, but I began to take a little time to explore why I was feeling exhausted. And I think, I want to, I guess, use the story not only as a way just to kind of get your take on this, but also to encourage everybody to not just so quickly assume that just because you have a certain tendency, does it mean that you have to maintain that? I was curious what was causing that sense of exhaustion, and I wasn't willing to just kind of buy the idea that I was an introvert, and so that was it. That's the reason, and I can't do anything about it. And what I realized was that when I was going into these environments, I was trying to put on a persona that
Yes.
that didn't come naturally. I was trying to be cool, which is pretty hard for me. I'm kind of the nerd, the geek of the bunch.
Yeah.
But I was trying to be something that I wasn't, to kind of borrow a cliche phrase. And that was what was actually exhausting. So,
Yes.
and once I was able to identify what was causing that, I changed my approach. So when I would go into these larger gatherings, rather than trying to mingle and try to be the cool guy and look great and have conversations with all these different people, and it was all these surface level conversations, I would hone in on an individual, maybe sit down, I might have a drink, might not, but I would just have a conversation with that individual person. And I know that's a strength of mine. And
Yeah.
I was able to get super comfortable in that. It was amazing how even the noise of the music around me, which was blaring, I've never understood loud music in public gatherings because I'm like, you can't have a
Right.
conversation.
Right.
But it became less of an annoyance to me because I was suddenly I was focused here doing the thing that I was
Right.
comfortable with. And
Yes.
that's where I was able to kind of find relief from that so-called exhaustion. And I know this is just one story and it's just my story, but I tell that because I think it's worth, and I want your professional take on this, but I think it's worth our listeners taking the time, not just, again, to kind of wrap that cloak of introversion around them and claim that as theirs and stop the conversation there, but maybe to take a little bit of time to look at why they feel so exhausted. It's good to take a break afterwards, for sure. I'll do the same thing, especially
Yes.
after speaking or even after I get done with the podcast a lot of times, because mentally I'm so just honed in.
Yes.
I do take a break
get
for
that.
a little bit. Yeah. But just exploring what's leading to that exhaustion, I think, is a really good exercise, don't you? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's always a good idea to look at self and to examine what's going on. And I love that you were able to identify that you weren't showing up as your authentic self, and how much effort it was to have this other persona. And when we're able to show up as our authentic self, how much more relaxing it is. And I also love that you were able to identify a way to manage yourself in that by focusing on one person and having that conversation, you were able to, the noise, the crowd, it diminished because you were focusing right here. For me, one of the things that I do when I go into that situation is I love to go with a friend or acquaintance, because what I'm really good at is introducing people. So I am not as comfortable going up and just introducing myself. I will do it, but it's so much more easier for me where I'll say, "Oh, hi, I'm Cindy, and I want to meet you. I want you to meet so and so, and she's blah 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 blah," and talk about my friend, right? That's a technique that I use when I'm in crowded situations and outside of maybe my comfort zone. So I think it's really important that, one, we do self-examination to understand how we're showing up, and if there is that tiredness or any side effect, we look and we ask ourselves, so what went on? What was causing that?
Yeah.
And then from there, look at how might I help myself, right? You are the only you there is. You have to take care of yourself. You have to treat yourself with kindness. And so if you're going to a situation that is more challenging for you, that causes you to bring everything, oh, I've, kind of got to perform, I've got to show up in this way. Why not be as kind to yourself as you possibly can before, during, and after that particular situation, so that you can really honor yourself and show up with integrity.
Yeah, no, I mean,
authenticity.
I think it's important to take care of ourselves. I guess just where I'm maybe playing a little bit of hardball is I want to encourage our listeners to go beyond the label, because it's possible.
Yes.
And when the exhaustion story for me, obviously the reason for my exhaustion, again, I could have very easily just called it introversion and gone on with my life, but I would have limited myself significantly. But I think that, whether somebody is insecure with themselves, they're dealing with some kind of emotional baggage, they just engage with somebody that reminded them of their dad, and so now they're freaking out because they had a bad experience growing up. And I mean, there's so much psychological baggage that we carry. Yes. And it might be easy to say, I'm an introvert, and stop there. Or we can say, you know what? Yeah, I'm tired at the end of the day. I'm going to take care of myself and to get some rest. But I'm also now going to start to take some time, whether it's going to a therapist or just doing some kind of inward searching, if you will, to figure out what it is that's leading to that exhaustion. Because it's not like introversion is a disease that we can't control, right? You pointed out earlier, Cindy, that this is a kind of a behavioral tendency that comes from childhood experiences and psychological development. And so the question is, how did we get here? And my story, again, was just one simple example. I wasn't trying to pat myself on the back. I just want to share it as an example. But there's so much different psychological baggage that we all carry, and taking the time to actually go back and explore where that's coming from will enable us to step beyond it more effectively.
Yes, absolutely. And I think really that's the only way we're going to be able to do that, is that self-reflection and that introspection, to ask ourselves, hey, what's going on? What's causing this? It comes down to, are you getting the outcomes you want in life?
Yeah.
If you're if your job is to go to these marketing events or conferences, because that's a part of obtaining business, how do you want to show up? Do you want to struggle with that, the rest of your career? Or do you want to have concrete practices or behaviors that you can implement that will help you be successful in it?
Right.
How horrible would it be that you go back and feel like a failure every time you go back into your hotel room after attending a conference? Oh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Why? That's a waste. Let's stop that. For sure. Yeah, we had a number of comments here too on what YouTube. Andres was saying, introversion is on a sliding scale. The extremes of extrovert and introvert are rare. And yeah, absolutely. It's a great point, Andres. And Cindy was kind of echoing that earlier. Ellen said, on Facebook, I found that doing the things that make me uncomfortable are most valuable. Putting myself out there gives me the best sense of accomplishment, especially because it doesn't come naturally. And yeah, again, first of all, Ellen, props to you for kind of stepping beyond the comfort zone. Just making that an exercise is extremely enabling, and probably a whole conversation for another day. But then also, again, exploring why that's uncomfortable, I think, is super healthy, because it enables you to more effectively step beyond that kind of so-called uncomfort zone. Dawn on Facebook says, I find that when you shoot, photographing clients, of course, you're dealing with a lot of different energies from others, and sometimes that energy can be draining. And what I immediately thought, Cindy, and I'd love, again, your expertise here, but Dawn's comment's interesting, because in my mind, what I'm imagining is that Dawn, or probably a lot of other photographers too, are kind of taking on the energy of the other clients, because somehow there's this kind of subconscious tendency to feel like take responsibility for their behavior, their actions, their feelings, their tendencies, versus being comfortable in oneself and not feeling the need to kind of take on that energy. But what would you say from your kind of professional expertise? So yes, I think it's important to separate ourselves as much as possible from the other's energies or emotions. And yet we know that emotions, like if I'm happy and I'm laughing and I'm so excited to see you, you're going to feel that too, right? So those energies do move between us. So when you've got somebody, and I'm imagining here the energies are draining. To your point, I'm imagining that somebody is rather boisterous and it's kind of taking from you. And I've been with people like that before. So what I do is I just breathe through that. That's something that helps me, is just breathing through that. It's just a certain time period I'm going to be with that person, and I manage my thoughts, right? That person is really excited. I'm glad for them. How wonderful for them that they're showing up this way, right? I get out of my head and I look at and even with curiosity, oh, I wonder why they're acting that way.
Yep.
I wonder why they're so excited.
Yeah.
Or with empathy, how wonderful for them. Curiosity and empathy, again, are really two good values to look through. They're great lenses to use to separate yourself in those spaces when you're a little overwhelmed.
Well, I think part of what drives introversion, and again, I can speak for myself here, but is in many cases insecurity with oneself in one form or another. And when we're insecure with ourselves, in many cases, there's a tendency to take on the energy of others more readily. Because we're not secure with who we are. So now we get, oh, well, if this person's doing this, then I got to take that on or that on. And the ability to be comfortable with ourselves enables us to do exactly what you're describing, which is to objectively observe out of curiosity, show empathy, because the way this other person or these people are behaving doesn't actually have to affect me. It can just kind of bounce right off. I'm observing it, I'm seeing it, but I'm choosing how to engage with it versus kind of taking it on. And that is extremely draining. Again, I speak from extensive experience, right? Where, again, because of my own personal issues, I'm taking on the so-called energy of others. And it's, first of all, not necessary, but it's extremely draining when we get to that place. So it's a good, I think, reminder for everybody to take a look inward again and get to a place where you're comfortable with yourself. Because when you're able to do that, you're able to engage with other people more comfortably as well.
Yeah, absolutely you are. Absolutely.
Okay, so I've got my little notebook of notes here. I was taking notes. So far we've got look at mindset, and I wrote down the quote, what might change for you if being an introvert wasn't limiting. Number 2 was focus on the other person. I actually kind of put in there serving the other person as well, because again, that focus on serving is super
that's one
healthy.
of my favorite words.
And then number 3 is take a few minutes for yourself during a longer shoot, just to kind of have a breather. And we talked about box breathing. Number 4 was schedule that reboot session after the shoot. And then I think you've got a 5th one for us as well, right?
Yeah, my last one is hire a life coach. If you are having trouble and you're not getting the outcomes you want, hire a life coach. Hire somebody that, and if it's deeper, of course, therapy is great. And I've have experienced with both. I love both. But as a life coach, that's my offer.
You're not biased at all, are you, Cindy?
No, not at all. What we want to do is we want to work on the mindset, right? And with a conversation, we can get to what are the underlying thoughts, what are the core beliefs, and then we would look at, is this not working? Okay. Then what can we pick up instead? And I love that. I even love the imaging. Like, I think about this. This is what I have, and it's not working for me. I'm going to leave it here. And now I'm going to pick up something, and I'm going to use something else moving forward. That's going to better serve me and getting the outcomes I want in life. And that would be the 5th one, to really examine your thoughts and your beliefs and what you want out of life. And when you have a partner to do that with, the partner can help. They hear what you're saying. Remember, I said before that sometimes our truths are so embedded, we think it's a fact when it's not really a fact. And so the partner can help hear that and bring it to your attention, and then you can examine it together.
That makes sense. You were talking about the idea of the object, almost treating this thing. I was thinking about a book that I've mentioned a number of times on the podcast before, Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul. Have you ever read that?
No, I haven't.
He talked, and I'm going to get you a copy of it because I think you would really love it. But Michael Singer talks about that so-called voice inside our head that we've been talking a lot about here on this episode today. But such a fascinating concept in that so-called voice, those thoughts that we have, whereas again, we have a tendency, and I'm guilty of this a million times over, of taking that thought or those thoughts and making them reality, obsessing over them, cycling them over and over and over again in our head. What he talks about in that book is the ability that we have, kind of like you were just describing, Cindy, to engage with that thought as an object. So like I've got my phone in my hand here. I can pick the phone up and then I can choose to put it down. The phone's not stuck to me. I choose what I do with it. I choose to pick it up, but I could do what I want with it. And now I also choose to put it down. And I have the ability to make that choice. And what Michael explains in that book and demonstrates beautifully is that you have the ability to do the same thing with your thoughts. You can see them. You can acknowledge them. We don't have to try to act like we're ignoring them, but we choose how to engage with them and the significance that we give to them. And I think that is extremely applicable to this conversation around introversion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at that way about navigating emotions also. Oftentimes we want to bury them, and it's just like, acknowledge them. I see you. I see you, guilt. What are you trying to tell me right now? Okay, and just sitting in with it and breathing through it, and then looking at what do you want to do moving forward.
Yep.
Right?
That's it. So, what do we want to do moving forward? I think that sums up the conversation beautifully. And I really appreciate you being willing to come and share it today on the podcast. Cindy,
will you just so much.
Well, no, thank you. And will you remind our listeners where they can learn more about you, both your website and social media as well?
Yes. So it's Cindy Ames, AMES. coaching.com is my website. You can get all the information there, and I have information on the Think, Feel, Act model. And then on social media, go to Instagram. I am at Cindy Ames Coach.
Perfect. And I've got that up on the screen too for anybody who's live streaming with us. By the way, thank you everybody who joined us today for the live conversation and for your comments and thoughts. And for those of you that are not listening live, you're listening to audio after the fact, come join us sometime. Come hang out. It's the benefit of the live stream. You can get to interact with, ask questions, comment on the conversation at hand with our guests. But thanks again, Cindy, for all your time today, for sharing your advice and wisdom as well.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on your podcast and for just being here. It was great to have a conversation with you, Nathan.
Totally my